Glenn Jones may be gone, but have no fear, Marvel Snappers. I am here to save the meta with another FauxTA. But don't worry, it's not going to be the same as every other FauxTA. The metagame's actually pretty good right now, so instead of focusing on how Sholo is oppressively good, we're going to focus on making other cards better. But what's the methodology to do this? First, I started with a list of all of the cards that had 0 played copies in the most recent Golden Gauntlet. In the absence of actual public metagame data, this is kind of the best I can do as a FauxTA artist, so to speak. The actual people who develop Marvel Snap can have much more reasonable ideas of which cards to target because they have access to actual win rate data. I can only look at this. So we're going to use this as a proxy for actual win rate data in what I would guess to be something similar to their process. Next, for all the cards that had 0 copies played in the previous Golden Gauntlet, I asked myself 3 questions. The first question is this actually bad? Some of the data set contained cards that weren't out yet, like Caliban Horseman of Pestilence or Gambit Horseman of Death. Obviously, those are not cards that I think are actually bad and thus deserve to get buffed. Next, is it Series 3 or above? We've seen some reticence from the Snap team to buff cards that are below Series 3 for fear of messing up the balance of the new player experience. For example, Mr. Sinister had 0 played copies and probably could get buffed in a meaningful way, but doesn't really have a lot of good knobs to get buffed, and taking it to 2-3 would make it pretty clearly an overstated 2-cost card for what the new player experience currently represents. So even though I think that is a thing you could do, the fact that he's in Series 1, I think disqualifies him. Finally, is it problematic to buff? This is definitely a more subjective ranking than an objective one, but I generally think that it's relatively more problematic to buff cards that are meaningfully and powerfully disruptive to your opponent's strategies. That's not to say they shouldn't ever do it, but that they do get an inordinate amount of grief every time a strategy like this discard your opponent's stuff, mill your opponent's stuff, clog your opponent's board, Galactus generally. Every time those decks are close to playable, if not actively good, they generate more negative sentiment than they seem to be worth. That's not to say that they shouldn't ever buff these cards, but that there is a high enough barrier behind me thinking it's a good idea that I thought it made a lot more sense to just take them out of the pool and focus on what would actually get things done. That left me with the list you can see right next to me, but there are still some other questions to ask before we just go slapping 1 power onto every single one of these cards and calling it a good OTA. Questions like, do I think 1 power would actually be meaningful to the card? And it turns out when I went through the list that there were quite a few that I thought were just very safe targets for a +1 power buff, and there were also quite a few that maybe didn't really feel like 1 power would make a meaningful amount of difference. That left me with a further restricted list. And you can see that list next to me as well. From here, there's really only one question. Do I actually have a good idea to address the card? And for about half of these, I did. So with all of that in mind, now you understand the process, let's jump in to my FauxTA, what I would do if I were in charge of Marvel Snap's OTA process. We're going to start with Zombie Captain Marvel. Zombie Captain Marvel, currently a 4/4 with an activate that gives her 3 power for the cards she destroys at her location. I want to make that 4 power. This is a card that I kind of went back and forth on because while it is true that a power boost could be meaningful to her, I don't think 1 point of power is going to do it for a card that is so awkward and clunky. Largely, my problems with Zombie Captain Marvel are pretty much related to how far away her activate ability is from actually being Captain Marvel. I consider it pretty dissonant that she has maybe 33% of a Captain Marvel ability, even though her name is Captain Marvel, and her ability is riffing on being Captain Marvel. Largely, I want to alleviate this, but I don't know the technical ways to do it. So I think the way I've come up with is just making her be a bigger, stronger, meaner, faster card. I don't think it's reasonable for me to want her to get that much closer to Captain Marvel functionality. At this point, she's been out long enough. People understand the difference between activate, move to the lowest to a location you're losing, and what actual Captain Marvel is. We also live in a world that is post Drax Avatar of Life, another character who is playing around in the Captain Marvel-y end of the pool. This is a card that I think people can understand, but is just fundamentally not strong enough. And I don't want to make it stronger when you don't activate it. That's one of the reasons why I didn't just want to slap power on her. I want you to be incentivized to actually use the ability of the card. For this reason, I've decided that even though +4 is a really scary bit of text, it is the kind of text that a card like this actually needs in order to be meta relevant. You are doing something very weird, very awkward, and very different from what any other deck is really trying to do when you play Zombie Captain Marvel, and I think you should be dramatically rewarded for that. So effectively, this is a buff of up to 3 power to this card. I also think you could, if you were like a little bit of a hack like I normally am, go the other way and just be like, let's make it a 4/7. Believe me, I have thought about it. I ended up thinking it's probably just better to buff the activate part of this card. I could even see buffing it further beyond this. This is the kind of thing where I feel like maybe brings it up to baseline playability, but not necessarily all that much higher than that. Largely, I think this is a card that is overdue for buffs, and if you have a chance to put +4 on a card and not really even be scared of it, that's a good chance to take. Next up is Weapon X Wolverine. I have identified 2 major problems with Weapon X Wolverine. The first is he doesn't really fit in the curve of Destroy in a meaningful way, and the second is, as a Destroy deck, you're pretty often blowing things up a lot, and you really don't want to put a lane there that you can't play any Destroy cards into. I looked to solve both of these problems. I have given Weapon X Wolverine the word indestructible. This is not like a keyword or anything. It's just the fastest way I thought I could convey the Wolverine mechanic here. When it dies, it doesn't die instead. Literally that simple. Just it doesn't die. You can treat it as either Colossus or Wolverine, however you want to do it. The way I've written it is meant to defer to the fact that I don't know how much room they have to put other text on here. I think that like there are much better ways to get the Wolverine mechanic on here. Like it regenerates, right? But I don't necessarily think that I could fit that within the amount of text that they have on this card. So I went with the shortest possible version, which to me was indestructible. They could also at some point maybe keyword the Wolverine mechanic as regenerate, and that would allow it to actually be on this card in a meaningful way, but that feels maybe beyond the scope of this video. Largely, what I wanted to get at here is that Wolverine's biggest problems are that he demands you take a turn off from your let's blow up a lot of small things strategy, and you don't really get to include him in that strategy. And this would fix both of those things. At 1/1, he would be an onboard scaler that you could repeatedly blow up, and he would revive himself, and that would allow him to continue scaling upward. Note that this doesn't help him. Like, him dying doesn't contribute to his own thing. Otherwise, the text is still the same. But I do think that largely this solves a lot of the problems with the card not making it into baseline destroy lists. This is now a card that I am very confident would be at the very least a competitor to something like Headpool, if not significantly better, and it would be a good complement to something like Deadpool because you would effectively have a second guy that you're really happy to draw and scale upwards early. That is a valuable role, and I do think that making Weapon X Wolverine into a shape similar to this would be something they should do. The big worry is I don't know if I've conveyed it well enough. I don't think indestructible conveys regenerate the way I want to, and I don't think I have the room to put a full sentence on here that goes, if this would die, it doesn't die. I strongly suspect that this card is already pushing on the boundaries of how much text they're willing to put on a card. Largely what I would want to do in an ideal world is give the Wolverines all a keyword that says regenerate and then slap that on him. Failing that, I think either of these things would be meaningful, but if you really want this card to succeed, both of them is the direction I would go. Next up is US Agent. Now, US Agent is a card that previously had text very similar to this, giving -4 power to 4, 5, and 6 cost cards. I think that there are 2 things that we can solve by changing US Agent's text to say 4+ cost cards and back to -4. The first is US Agent is a card that is particularly useful against things like Doom 2099 decks. And I know that the devs tend to have some concern about that archetype and about other archetypes that are pretty easy to play. We see those kind of decks getting maybe disproportionately nerfed, while decks that are harder to play sometimes get disproportionately buffed. Misery 4-9, anyone? Largely because the wider range of the player base seems to be a lot more able to grasp what Doom 2099 is asking of them than they are what Misery was asking of them at the time. Now, the reason for this is fairly straightforward, but the reason that US Agent helps that is because it's a pretty clear-cut thing that is good against an archetype that you guys are typically pretty afraid of being good. There aren't really tech cards for Doom 2099 in a meaningful way. And that means that this is like maybe a first of its kind of thing, where it's like we are explicitly making a card that's like, oh, I'm going to be great against Doom 2099. Because people talk about Stardust and it's like, yeah, kinda, like that does work, but it's not nearly as clean as something that's like actually winning lanes on the final turn of the game. And I think that that's a very notable addition to what a deck that is trying to beat Doom 2099 can do. And I would like to see US Agent be sort of brought back into the fold as that kind of counter. Oh, also, I mean, he should hit Fin Fang Foom. Like, what are we doing here? Mad Thinker has been nothing but mediocre ever since his release. The nickname Mad Stinker has really stuck on this guy, and it's totally deserved. I think that what he's asking you to do is super weird and super out of the ordinary, and since he's a one-drop, not really all that reliable because of the plethora of ways to get rid of not just one-drops, but also green power. Mad Thinker is a card that I want to put more emphasis on the payoff of. I don't want to make him an easier card for you to splash in your deck. I want you to dedicate your deck to him, and for that reason, I've put Mad Thinker to gaining +3 power every time you do this. Now, this is a really strong one-drop now. I realize that. I don't know if this is the kind of thing that's sustainable, but it's the kind of swing that I'd like to see them take. They are putting a card that is extremely counterable in an extremely powerful position. I do think that doing this right now might not be particularly advisable, given the plethora of Sholo decks that are pretty easily able to, with Kitty Pryde and Merlin and things of that nature, just kind of hit his thing enough of the time that he's just going to be a free addition to Sholo decks. Maybe this is the wrong time to do that, but we'll get to Sholo maybe a little bit later. That said, I do think that this is long-term where I'd want something like Mad Thinker to end up. I want this card to actually feel like he remotely mattered, and I don't really think that giving him more base power is the way I'd want to do that. This is a really cool build-around that's asking you to do something that has basically never been rewarded in the history of Marvel Snap, which is have full hand at the beginning of turn. I would like to give him a big slice of the pie here, because I don't think it's very likely he ever gets any help in this area. So with that said, Mad Thinker +3 power on the ability. Fan Fei's biggest problem is that her ability is kind of the only reason you play her, and her ability is quite undercosted for what it is to play a 4-cost card. So largely the amount that she's giving you for the payoff is not going to be enough to justify playing that 4-cost. So I made her a 3-cost. Although I will be honest, I thought long and hard about coming into this video and saying Fan Fei 2-3. I am a little bit scared of that, right? Move is a pretty well-worn archetype that they've supported pretty generously previously. I don't necessarily think it's the right move to give them such a powerful activator. So I went with the safe option, which is just make Fan Fei a 3-4. You could argue 3-5 with me. I would totally listen, but I do think that largely the key thing to understand about Fan Fei is that her ability simply isn't 4-cost activate worthy, and it needs to be a cheaper ability on a cheaper card. So either 2-3, 3-4, 2-2, something like that. Any of those would be a meaningful upgrade to what Fan Fei is. I think it is largely just a sort of, remember when they used to make a bunch of 4-cost activates that sucked? Yeah, this is one of them, right? Like it's like vestigial. And I don't want to leave something hanging around like a vestigial tail on a baby. Let's get that off and let's make it a more reasonable card. I think either 2-2 or 3-4 is a very interesting space for what Fan Fei can do. And now we get into the cards that I felt pretty comfortable saying +1 power would be a meaningful change to. This is Orca. Orca is going to be a 19 power card when you play him alone, but more importantly, a 12 power card when you play him somewhere else. I feel like that fallback is quite important. Having him be, again, not even as big as a normal Hulk, right? Like, I do think that this guy would be an even better card if he was, say, Hulk stats +5 when he's alone, but maybe that's not necessarily the right direction to go. Either way, he's pretty awful and can easily benefit from a free point of power. Rescue up to 4/5. Now, this is actually kind of a little bit dicey in that I do think it's a pretty meaningful upgrade to something like a Surtur list. Well, not a Surtur list, a Scar list, to have an easy access 4/10 that's actually just going to be a 4/10. I don't know that it'll end up being particularly relevant. I think it probably won't end up being particularly relevant. And for that reason, I think I'm basically just totally fine to do it. Rescue should get that extra point of power. The breakpoint for Shang-Chi is no longer a meaningful thing. If I'm not mistaken, she's in Series 3, so it's not like we have to worry about Jessica Jones. And the fact that Jessica Jones exists the way she does and Rescue doesn't, I mean, I know Jessica Jones has a harder condition to meet, but I do think that they still are relatively comparable cards, and I don't really see a ton of problems with making Rescue actually have a home somewhere, potentially with that sort of Scar type of list. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do, and 4/10 just frankly isn't all that special at this point, even though I think, you know, an easy 4/10 could change that, and Rescue would probably be the easiest 4/10 in the game. Mole Man to 3/5, pretty free. Don't really feel like I got to spend a lot of time talking about this one. We have Ozymandias in the game already. Mole Man to 3/5 is way more respectable than Mole Man at 3/4. Would be a meaningful boost to those decks. Didn't really want to go in for all of the things like, what if we got rid of the fact that Mole Man banishes? Because I think that's, like, at the very least good flavor. And a little outside the scope of this video, a little bit more debatable, a little bit more like, okay, you know, I could see a lot of counter arguments there. But I do think that it's very clear to me that 3/5 Mole Man, very free thing to do. They just did a bunch of rock stuff. Give the rock guys, throw the rock guys a bone, or a rock, as it were. Maria Hill to 1/3. I mean, 1/3 seems like a stat line that they're very happy to put cards at right now. Maria Hill is a card that has been wildly unplayable for an extended period of time. I think 1/3, if Nightcrawler can be a 1/3, a lot of 1-drops can be a 1/3, and Maria Hill is definitely one of those cards. Feels very free to me to put that additional power onto her. Kahhori to 4/8 is, I think, nominally kind of risky, but we already buffed Mad Thinker, and I'd really like to see if this archetype actually has any legs. So with that in mind, I do think that the fact that Kahhori saw literally 0 play in the Golden Gauntlet, as did every single one of these cards, while she is probably one of the strongest of the cards on this list, I still do think I'd like to see them take a swing at seeing what she could do if she was really outputting stats, like really kind of getting close to that Devil Dinosaur level. They took away her ability to work with Sebastian Shaw, which was not necessarily the only reason you'd play her, but it was a pretty big part of her portfolio, and I'd like to give her some more space to operate within in just being a really beneficial and powerful card that maybe you play with a Wong or something. Last up is Ezekiel Sims, and I'm not 100% sure this is a buff. It's a little bit awkward, right? But I do think that it might be a buff, and it's probably worth trying to see if it's a buff. The problem with Ezekiel Sims is if you add power to him, less cards trigger him, but I do think going on the 3, 5, 7 range is, like, particularly reasonable. If I had the option to make text changes, and he's got a pretty long text box, so I don't know that I do, what you could do also is say equal to or higher alongside making this buff. That would be something that I would be pretty interested in doing. And last up, Sholo, who I think it's pretty clear is still one of, if not the best cards in the entire game of Marvel Snap right now. I think he's several points of power over, and I do think that he's like a relatively fair overlord to have. I just think that maybe it's been enough time with this guy doing the thing that he does. My pitch for Sholo is to just take him to +2. I don't like it. It's not what I would have wanted to do. It's much the same with like putting Star-Lord to 5. I'm just like, oh God, is that actually necessary? But I think it might be. And this is like, I'm not happy with doing this. I just don't really know what else I could do to Sholo that feels satisfying. And the success of Star-Lord at 5 cost has made me start to rethink my previous desires to not really do this and whether or not it's actually a betrayal of player expectations. I'm interested to see what they end up doing with this card, if they end up doing anything with this card, and what the reaction is should they actually do it. Largely, I think that +2 Sholo is probably still pretty good, and I don't really know, like, he's just he's in such a unique space mechanically where he's kind of the only card that's giving like a really big buff in the entire game. Like the only card that's going to be able to do what he does is still going to be him no matter what number you put on him, which makes me feel like maybe it's just totally fine to do this because his space is so singularly his that it's just, like, even if he's doing way less of it, it's still just the card you play in those decks. I'm really interested to find out, but this is the only nerf that I want to pitch in the entire FauxTA. I hope you enjoy. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really like nervous about this video because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what should I did this whole process and it's like, should I show you the process? Should I just start with the FauxTA? Are you guys interested in seeing that little behind the scenes of my methodology? And I honestly have no idea. So if you like the video, you know, like, comment, it really helps this video out. Subscribe, of course, if you're not. Thank you so much. I've been KMBest. As always, you have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.